the Inspired Pilot Podcast, episode 16.
Going out and using it as much as possible and sharing it with as many people as we can. Take that coworker flying for their first hop. Don't just chat about it over coffee. Go do it.
Inspiring stories from inspiring pilots from around the world. Welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast with your host, Marvin Robinson.
Okay, welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast. This is Marvin Robinson, and I'm delighted to introduce today's featured inspiring pilot, Rakic. Welcome to the show, Rod. Are you ready to inspire today?
I am, Marvin. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. Let's go. Rakic is committed to helping aviation work better. He's the co-founder at OpenAirplane, which makes renting an airplane as easy as renting a car. Rod's career spans 20 years of building businesses as tools to enhance and manage brands. A digital strategist, professional pilot, and user experience nerd with a mission. Okay, I've given our listeners, the Inspired Pilots, a short introduction. Rod, can you take a minute, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and before we dive into your journey, can you give us a brief overview of what you're doing aviation-wise right now?
Well, I'm focused on growing OpenAirplane. OpenAirplane makes renting an airplane as easy as renting a car. And we started that business in June of 2013 with 6 locations around the United States, a couple of dozen aircraft in this rental network that we've created. We've now grown that to 84 locations around the United States and 34 states, offering now over 280 aircraft to the over 9,000 pilots who have signed up to fly with us.
Fantastic. And whereabouts in the United States are you from?
I'm from the Midwest of the United States, originally from Michigan, spent some time in California, live in Chicago, Illinois today. Most of your listeners will know about Chicago, and they've probably changed planes there at some point.
Exactly. There's a big hub there, isn't it, Chicago?
Yes, there's Chicago O'Hare and a couple of large airports in the area. About 80% of the people who fly in and out of O'Hare never leave the airport. They're on to other destinations. There's a joke in the U.S. here about the Midwest being the flyover states. So you're either flying to or from the coasts, and no one actually stops here. But I tend to disagree with that. It's a great place to live.
I'm sure there's a lot going on there, so we won't touch on any internal politics there, all right? Okay, on the Inspired Pilot Podcast, we delve into the journey of our featured guest, and today, that's you, Rod. Before we get into that, every journey does have to start somewhere. So, Rod, you're a professional pilot now. I'm looking forward to jumping into your journey, but tell us the story, Rod, of how you first got involved with flying and why, in particular, you wanted to be a pilot.
Sure. I think I've always wanted to fly something. I think when I was 4, I was traveling back to Eastern Europe with my family. I'm the son of immigrants from the former Yugoslavia. And so when I would be shipped back to visit family in the old country, the best part of the trip was getting on the jet. And so that was inspiring. Star Wars inspired me. I figured I'd grow up and be flying an X-Wing before you knew it. Probably spent most of my time as a child dreaming about being an astronaut, and then decided that I was going to be a fighter pilot. And so I sort of started tuning myself up for that. And then sometime in high school, I think I realized that I wasn't going to be a fighter pilot when my eyes weren't going to let me get a slot at the Air Force Academy. I joined the Civil Air Patrol cadet program when I was 12. And started learning about aviation through that program. It's a fantastic way to get into aviation. Even was going to attend the Air Force Academy prep school, got the letter from them, and really decided against going full-time military because I realized that I really wanted to fly, and that was going to be my primary way I wanted to live my life. That was the lifestyle I was after. And I went after a civilian aviation degree. I entered Western Michigan University's aviation program in 1991, and about 1993 decided that maybe living on ketchup sandwiches wasn't the best way to plan a career. So I ended up in the communications department as I changed majors. But I had gotten my private pilot certificate. I was still, very interested in aviation, but I just wasn't going to be my day job. So I went into communications and started designing websites as early as 1995, had my own design studio, and then went off to work at a bunch of large interactive and traditional advertising agencies. I've held pretty much every job at an ad agency in my career. Started as a creative, became an account guy, did media, done a lot of strategy work over the years. And aviation got set aside for a while. Actually, there was a 4-year stint there while I was still in college when I got my private certificate. I really didn't fly for over 4 years until I finally came back to it just before moving to Chicago. And then in 2001, after 9/11, I was too old and too married to go full-time Air Force, but I wanted to be part of the solution. So I joined up with Civil Air Patrol again and started working with emergency services and started flying again as a Civil Air Patrol pilot, which is, and for those of you overseas, Civil Air Patrol is the auxiliary of the United States Air Force. I explained my job in Civil Air Patrol as being the Air Force equivalent of a volunteer fireman.
Okay.
And so I, over the years, gained a lot of aviation experience through flying search and rescue missions, disaster relief missions, photography, photo reconnaissance, that kind of thing, after disasters. And that then led to getting my commercial ticket, after getting my instrument ticket, and becoming a search and rescue mission pilot. And that's been a lot of fun. That's been some of the best flying I've done.
Okay, I'm interested in the Civil Air Patrol sort of movement. Thanks for giving us insight there, because we don't have anything like that in the UK, and we'll touch on that later during your journey. You mentioned that you're at university, 1991 to 1993, and was that when you got your PPL then?
Yeah, I got my private certificate after a long training cycle. I started just after I turned 16. I'm still afraid of turning left in a car. Had just got my driver's license when I went to Civil Air Patrol's cadet flight encampment, which was a pretty cool experience. In fact, in the news this week is the 1 week to solo program that they're running at Sun and Fun down in Lakeland, Florida. I was down there for a couple of days this week. And that is the same program that I went through. That's how I learned to fly. In 1 week, this snot-nosed 16-year-old went from being a pedestrian to getting ready to solo by this really intense sort of encampment that Civil Air Patrol cadets get to go to, where you basically fly all morning, you do your ground school in the afternoon, and you study at night, and you just do that for a week straight. And by the end of that, you probably have 8 to 10 hours of flight time under your belt, and you're ready to solo. I then went back home and started working, odd jobs and, the typical sort of teenager gigs to make money. Most kids in high school in the U.S. save up their dollars so they can buy a car, or buy a nicer car than the one they're driving. In my case, it was all going to flight training, and so I did flight training off and on as I could afford it all the way through high school. And it was only after completing my freshman year of college that I actually completed my private pilot certificate. Okay.
And referring back to that, like I say all the time, the challenges, there are lots of initial challenges. And could you take us back to the beginning for the benefit of a listener sitting on the fence who's thinking about learning to fly, or someone currently training and maybe experiencing their own challenges right now? What did you find challenging during the PPL training, and how did you overcome this? One particular thing maybe.
Sure. Well, like I said, unlike most people, I had the opportunity to do my primary flight training in what people would call an accelerated course, and flying every day like it was my job, which was a great way to learn to fly. I recommend that to everyone who wants to learn how to fly, and especially if they're looking at costs. You'll save a lot of money by flying more in a shorter period of time. But flying 10 hours in a week. Then it's pretty extreme. But even with that, I still had the same kind of, peaks and valleys and sort of my learning curve. I remember right at the end, as we were getting ready to solo, I just hit a wall. I could fly the airplane. I had the systems knowledge. I could fly the pattern. I could fly the approach like it was on rails. But that last few seconds, those few critical moments of how to control the aircraft and get it ready for a smooth landing on the main gear was not something I was internalizing very easily. I had a great instructor, but I was really flying great approaches and ending them with really crappy landings.
And the time was running out as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. You had this real important deadline is at the end of the week. You go home, and so it was really a challenge for me to sort of learn that the final approach and then the round out and the flare are not all one maneuver, that they are distinct, and by keeping them distinct in your mind, you'll internalize that. And it just took, I just hit a plateau in my learning right when it was super critical. So even folks that are successful are going to hit learning plateaus in their flight training, and we should just be setting the expectation that that's just part of the process for everyone, whether you're doing this over the course of many months and in some cases many years, or not. Now, the rest of my flight training was punctuated by the fact that I just couldn't afford to do it. So I was only flying when I could. I was taking summer jobs, driving the fuel truck at the airport, and then, saving up all that to just eke out a 45-minute flight lesson when I could with one of the instructors at the school. I came back from college and actually was the office manager at a flight school. That's how I finished my flight training. I actually was running the flight school during the day, and then at 6 o'clock in the evening, we close up shop, lock the doors, and I'd go hop in a 172 Skyhawk. A lot of my flight training actually happened at night. I actually had more time in my logbook at night than I had during the day when I actually completed primary flight training and went on to my check ride. When I showed up to my check ride, the examiner looked at my logbook and said, "Wow, you've got a lot of night flight experience." And it was cool. Even as a student pilot, very rare, I was signed off to fly solo cross country as a student between Detroit City Airport and one of the local airports downriver, which was very unusual. But it was the kind of thing where it was really hard to get lost. You followed the river, you wouldn't penetrate the Class Bravo airspace. And I had a girlfriend that lived down near this other airport, so I would fly down to see her after work, and so it accumulated the experience I need in terms of flying in kind of an unusual way. So the two things I want to offer is expect those plateaus, know that you'll just work through them, and don't expect that if you've got one that there's something wrong. And then the other thing is, when you're not flying often, you'll expect to take 2 steps forward, 1 step back as you kind of relearn things. If you're not flying often enough to sort of keep things in working memory, if you're taking 2 weeks between lessons, don't expect to jump in the cockpit and feel really fresh with the knowledge that you learned a while back. And that's just the nature of the beast with learning to fly when you've got other commitments and or limitations. But I enjoy the journey. Primary flight training really is a magical experience. It changes you more than anything I've ever encountered.
Yeah. Did you manage to nail that solo on the end of that week?
No. I went home without the solo. It was a huge, crushing disappointment. I took that. I started mowing the lawn, the grass at the local airport, and even had to switch from Cessnas to Pipers because that's what they had at the local flight school. And then got a new instructor, and that instructor just had a different way of explaining it to me. he was awesome. He was a former Air Force pilot. He had flown forward air control in the Vietnam War. Knew everything there was to know about flying light aircraft, and he taught me how to land the thing, and I've been sort of polishing that skill ever since.
Excellent. Yeah, it's definitely something that we continue and strive to make perfect always. So yeah. How many different aircraft have you flown to date, and what aircraft do you hold the closest to your heart so far?
I've got the typical mix for someone that's got over 1,000 hours like me. I have flown mostly Cessna products, but with the 172, I sold in the 152, then I stepped back into the 172, but then I've flown Piper, products, the Cherokees and the Warriors, and the early aughts, I started flying the DA-40, which is the 4-seat diamond aircraft, which is great. I called it the poor man's Cirrus. Transitioned into G1000 equipped airplanes, flying the Cirrus and the Cessna 182 Skylane, which is the primary airplane I fly for the Civil Air Patrol, both steam gauge and glass cockpit 182s. I'm checked out to fly the GA8 Airvan, the Australian bush plane from Gippsland, that Civil Air Patrol flies. And so pretty much it's Civil Air Patrol and then a bunch of island hopper services, fly that airplane. So I'm looking forward to a day where my Airvan time gets me a job, somewhere warm and beautiful, like the islands, because they're looking for an Airvan driver. And then I've just got a smattering of experience, flying right seat and turboprop and some turbine airplanes. I even have, thanks to a good friend, 45 minutes in the stealth bomber, the B-2 weapons systems trainer, the level D full motion simulator. Actually,
you almost took my breath away then. I was like, oh, the simulator. Okay, but still good.
See, there's a way that you explain these things to people for maximum effect.
It works.
So it's been, and that looks really good in your logbook too, because it's Cessna 182, Cessna 182, B2A sim, awesome. Cessna 182, Cessna 182, Cessna 172, and so the logbook is full of some fun things. Just one trip in a rotor, 2 trips in gliders, one of which tried to kill me. I'm always looking for other experiences. A little bit of tail wheel time, not enough to really be competent, and that'll be one of my next challenges.
Yeah, I think I'll join you with the tail wheel challenge. Maybe we can keep in touch and see how we're doing.
Yeah,
definitely something I'm interested in. And go on, put it out there. What's your favorite aircraft that you've flown to date?
I have like 45 minutes in an L-39.
Nice.
And that is a pretty awesome thing. It was the first time I had flown a pointy-nosed jet airplane with an ejection seat. And I will say that that was a little bit like sex. In no way did it disappoint. It was just as good as everyone had said it was going to be like. And so got to fly that airplane in formation with a couple other L-39s during a team's demo. And so that was the first time I'd ever flown formation and the first time I'd flown a jet, all in one sort of amazing experience. The minute I can go run out and buy one, I'm totally going to do that.
You're on it, yeah. How were your formation skills?
Let's just say I'm not ready to get my formation card just yet. I have a long way to go.
Okay, so the Blue Angels are okay then, yeah? They're still safe?
Their jobs are safe.
Okay, excellent. Let's touch on your journey now. So you've mentioned about how you acquired your PPL. Not so straightforward. There's almost a common thread sort of working amongst some of the guests here where, money wasn't always available, but people sort of did whatever job, whether it's waitressing, mowing the lawns. People are really digging deep to achieve that goal and prepared to do whatever it takes. Okay, so you've got your PPL, you've got an instrument rating. Take us along on that journey.
Yeah, I've got my instrument rating, later on than most. I flew as a VFR pilot. I was an instrument student, I like to say, for like 3 years. I logged like the first 20 hours of my instrument training over the course of like 3 years, and then finally I said, okay, that's it. I'm gonna go get that instrument rating done. So I had a friend who was a flight instructor part-time in Los Angeles, and here in Chicago, the weather is not your friend when it comes to aviation, especially in the wintertime. We definitely have seasons, and there's lots of icing in the clouds and snow and high winds and freezing rain and all those kinds of things that make you want to sit, at home and maybe work on the simulator. So I took the week between Christmas and New Year and flew out to Los Angeles. I went to Van Nuys Airport and flew with my buddy, who we'd flown together in Civil Air Patrol, and he offered to sort of knock it out and gave up his entire week to just fly, and flew like it was my job over the course of 1 week to go from 20 hours of instrument training to 40 hours. So over 20 hours of instrument training in 5 days to prepare for an instrument check ride, on New Year's Day. And it was a lot. And you get to a point where you get saturated, and there's a lot of learning that happens as you internalize what you've learned, and the neurons sort of form those pathways. My theory is that that happens when you're staring at the tile in the shower.
Yeah.
In the morning, and then the problem with accelerated programs is there's only so many showers you get to take in that period of time, and so it's tough to really internalize things, and go from sort of rote learning and to actually be practiced with new skills. And instrument flight training is all about bandwidth packing, as my friend 𝗙𝗶𝗍𝗀𝗀𝗃 says, and it's an amazing skill to acquire, but no one should go at it just saying, well, if I got through my private certificate, instrument training can't be that tough. It's just as much work, if not more, to jump from a private pilot certificate to an instrument certificate. And I don't think most people sort of understand that. They just don't grok it when they go into it. They just think, oh, it's just another certificate. I've already done the hard part. But there's a statistic that a single pilot flying an instrument approach is processing 4 times the amount of information as a surgeon does during an open heart procedure.
Wow, that's a stat, that is.
Right, that's good at parties.
Yeah.
And, so is it, when people ask you, sorry, is it hard to fly airplanes? Well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But really, we also sort of, on the other end of the spectrum, sort of overdo it sometimes. I mean, face it, flying is pretty easy. You push forward, the houses get bigger. You pull back, the houses get smaller. Everything else is pretty much details. Yeah. And that's what I tell people when they ask me if it's hard to learn how to fly. But I finally made it through. After 2 tries, I got through the check ride for the instrument certificate. Did the same thing. Did an accelerated course where I just took a week and really made it my job to do flight training in order to get my commercial certificate, which, looking back, was way easier than the instrument. Everyone thinks that it keeps getting harder, and the commercial certificate was a lot more fun. You get to look outside the airplane again, and I don't know, like 80% of it is, just figuring out that all the stuff that you can't do legally, and versus the actual flying of the airplane part. But that's fun too, really getting mastery of the airframe, and being able to, make it do exactly what you want to do. But flying professionally is a fun transition for any pilot. And so anyone who's got their instrument ticket hasn't gone and done the commercial, even if you don't expect to ever get paid to fly airplanes, I'll just challenge you and say, go do the commercial ticket, if only to learn some more maneuvers and tighten up the standards that you fly to, and give yourself, one more challenge. And that's the great thing about flying, is you're always looking for another challenge. If you're not, you're probably, I don't know, you can take up golf or something.
Yeah. You mentioned, obviously, you went from Chicago. You weren't happy with the weather, so you went out to Los Angeles, knocked out your IR. What was the driver there? Was that just a logical step just to get your IR, or you wanted it to, increase your missions, etc., back in Chicago? Yeah,
it's handy to have an instrument ticket here in the Midwest, and if you're going to travel, but I really wanted to get to being a professional pilot. And so the instrument ticket was one of the things you had to do is get your instrument rating and then move on to the commercial certificate. And so I had this good friend. We started flying together in CAP. His call sign was Hollywood.
Nice.
He looked the part too,
Go on, what was yours?
My call sign is fanboy.
Fanboy, okay.
Yeah, remember, there's one rule when it comes to call signs, is you don't get to pick your own call sign.
Okay, gotcha.
My squadron named me fanboy, and anyone who knows me probably knows why. And that's just one of those things where you kind of adopt the culture of flying, not just flying in general aviation, but sort of that mission oriented culture of using flying as a tool to complete a mission.
Yeah.
Which has always been inspiring to me, and the chance and when I do get to do that, it's a good use of my time.
Okay, so while you were doing upgrading your license status, were you still part of the Civil Air Patrol and active there?
Yes, I went back into Civil Air Patrol in 2001. I'm still flying. I'm a squadron operations officer. I hold the rank of captain, and I'm a search and rescue ground team leader as well as a mission pilot. And so that's always been part of my evolution in terms of my flying. I went to the National Emergency Services Academy in 2007 to get trained up to be a mission pilot. It's a great experience. It's a little bit like getting a type rating, is what I've been told. It feels like. Some people that fly for the airlines have told me it's some of the best training they've ever received. It takes your typical sort of civilian, maybe only private pilot. No instrument rating is required, but you have to have 200 hours of experience to complete being a mission pilot. So you can show up to school on day one with 175 hours, and they're going to teach you how to do all the things that everyone else has been telling you not to do. It's the kind of flying that anywhere else would be considered to be reckless. We're flying search and rescue, which means that somebody's in trouble, and we're flying profiles that are typically 1,000 feet above the ground at fairly slow air speeds with high angles of bank, near to all the obstacles and all the terrain, in order to be able to find a downed aircraft or take the pictures that emergency managers need, or whatever else the mission is. It's all the flying that that you were trained away from are the skills you need to be a search and rescue pilot. And so it's an interesting transition. You also make this big transition between learning to fly as a private pilot is all about single seat flying, right? Even though you've got 4 seats in a Skyhawk, you learn to fly as a private pilot with the assumption that you're the only pilot on board. Yeah. And so it's a single seat mentality. It is a single pilot cockpit resource management environment. And so most pilots, when they show up to NESA as a Civil Air Patrol trainee, don't have a lot of experience in sort of coordinating with crew. And Civil Air Patrol search and rescue crews are typically 3 people. They're a pilot, a mission observer, and a mission scanner in the back. And the mission scanner's job is to scan with the Mark I eyeball and find a downed aircraft or find a target, take pictures of it, whatever it is. The mission observer in the right seat might not even be a qualified pilot. They might just be someone who likes to fly and serve in that capacity. They're the quarterback of the mission. Sometimes they're the busiest person in the cockpit, really. And then the pilot drives the bus, is the aircraft commander and ultimately responsible for safety of flight. But being able to work together as a team to accomplish a mission, and sometimes that mission changes in the middle of the flight, and you can be retasked to do other things. And all these, you're working on someone else's schedule. You're trying to hit a time on target, or you're trying to have get all your paperwork and your mission briefing done in order to be able to, launch, in order to be able to, get in grid at a particular time. All those kinds of things are skills that just aren't part of just learning to fly airplanes. So that has been a really cool bit of my flying experience is flying missions, flying whether it's photography missions over flooding or searches for downed aircraft or missing persons, flying the tracks left by a tornado across the ground to map it for emergency managers. I even got to blow up a bit of terrain once. We had some flooding here in Illinois, and I took a crew. It was a Army National Guardsman in the back getting video reconnaissance for the Army Corps of Engineers who needed to decide whether they were going to blow up a big berm of flood control as a flood control measure.
Yeah.
And so they got to, get this video, and it was like really windy, and it was, turbulence was pretty severe. But we managed to get the first flight down, and then there was a second flight, kind of a backup flight planned. And we actually said, no, it's exceeding our safety limits. So, and saying no when safety limits are exceeded is pretty tough.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we got the photography that we needed in order to let the emergency managers decide whether they were going to flood a bunch of farmland or they were going to allow a town to disappear as the Mississippi River continued to grow.
Yeah.
And so they ended up blowing up a levee. And I don't get to drop bombs. But I got to blow something up, so I'm calling it a kill.
Rod, you just did it again, didn't you? Same thing you did with the B-2 story. I was like, you're dropping bombs. Yeah, you led me along there. Thanks a lot. Hook, line, and sinker. I do love the way the Civil Air Patrol, gives you a real purpose to your flying. From my point of view, I try to move away from the £100, $100 burgers, and give me any excuse to fly for a reason. That's what I'll try to do. But when you really have something really at stake, significant like safety and saving people and humanitarian stuff, it must be really gratifying as a pilot to be a part of that.
It really is. I really appreciate being part of the team.
As you got your IR rating and your commercial ticket, how did that affect your status in the Civil Air Patrol in terms of your flying? Obviously, you've got up to the rank of captain, but what's the deal there regarding your license status?
Well, being able to fly in the instrument system, first of all, just getting an instrument rating means that you're going to become a better pilot. You will look back and be amazed at how sloppy your flying used to be when suddenly you're flying in that little bubble of airspace that the instrument system gives you. And so just being more disciplined in the cockpit, being just a better aviator comes from going through that and completing that training. It made me more useful. So the commercial ticket didn't make a huge difference. It does give me the opportunity to fly some passenger carrying flights, occasionally, if there's a if there's a need for like a federal official or something to go, be transported or something. The commercial ticket gives me that. But the instrument certificate added the most utility to my flying for Civil Air Patrol, because now I could fly in weather that was below, VFR, visual flight rules, and fly, in conditions where you wouldn't be able to fly as a private pilot without that certificate, without the ability to fly in the clouds and in lower visibility. And so suddenly I was being asked to fly more because I could, take trips that I couldn't take before, and I could fly missions that would otherwise be beyond my grasp. And so that sort of aligns very well with the fact that I love to fly airplanes. So being asked to do it more often is pretty cool.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so you're keeping very busy as a captain in the Civil Air Patrol. So tell us, how did the OpenAirplane, your current venture, how did that concept arrive?
It's not your typical sort of .com startup origin story. So, we didn't sort of all show up and say, we're going to start a company. What it really started with was that we were scratching our own itch. Myself and Adam Fast, my co-founder, and the other people that have been working on the team, we're all pilots, and we're all renter pilots. And we've been renting airplanes, for a long time. And And so, because we weren't owners, we always had to go through the same sort of hassle and expense if we wanted to fly in a new place. This idea that you have to do a local checkout every time you want to fly at a new flight school or a new flying club. It's almost a dirty little secret in aviation. It's not in the brochure. Everyone just assumes that if you have a pilot certificate here in the U.S., you can fly anywhere in the U.S. Well, sure you can. You can definitely get in your airplane and fly it anywhere in the U.S. You can learn to fly here in Illinois, but then fly in Florida. The problem is in reality, because of the limitations of insurance and legacy and the industry, that your pilot certificate kind of turns off when you leave your home base.
Yeah.
And that, and it's the same way in Europe, and it's the same way across the world. If you learn to fly at a particular flying club, you can't go to the next flying club over and immediately start flying their airplanes, even if you have a certificate in your pocket. There's this idea that they need to check you out. You have to fly a checkout, which is going to take half a day and hundreds of dollars, and you have to demonstrate proficiency. And some of those checkouts are pretty easy. It's go up with an instructor for half an hour, do 3 landings, and okay, great, you're good. They hand you the keys. There are some flying clubs. Their checkouts are 2 days. It's longer of a process to get checked out with some flying clubs here in the U.S. than it is to actually complete the initial private pilot check ride with a designated examiner, and that's kind of ridiculous.
That sounds ridiculous. Yeah.
There's a joke about check rides. They should be like a woman's skirt. They should be short enough to be exciting and long enough to cover everything.
Boom, boom. I like that.
And so we looked around for basically a solution of how do we make all this work better. There were in 2011 there were lots of folks like the team at AOPA and others, working on the problem. How do you make flight training work better? How do you get less people dropping out? The dropout rate is north of 80%, which is miserable. And it's long and it's expensive, and they were looking at ways to sort of make getting pilots into the community and into the lifestyle of personal aviation work better.
Yeah.
I said, great. Lots of people are working on that part of the problem. I'm not going to spend any time thinking about that. But what I didn't see in 2011 was people thinking about what is the value proposition of having a pilot certificate in your pocket? What is the reason why I have this piece of plastic that I spend a lot of time and a lot of money, not only just to get, here in the US, flight training now averages north of $10,000. It's going to take at least 6 months for most people that have like a job, that aren't in an accelerated program.
Yeah.
The average number of flight hours on a student's IACRA form now when showing up for their initial private pilot check ride is over 100 hours. It's actually 105 hours, the average amount of time it takes a student to be ready for a check ride. And 40 hours is the legal minimum in a Part 141 flight school. But any flight school that says, it'll take you 40 hours to learn to fly is not being all that honest with you. It used to be 80 hours, and that seemed like a lot, but now it's over 100. So learning to fly is still a challenge, and getting more pilots means fixing that. But beyond that, what is the value proposition once you've got your certificate, right? I think learn to fly is the wrong call to action for us as a community. Harley-Davidson dealerships don't have big signs that say, learn to ride.
Yeah.
I mean, they might, but it's like a secondary or tertiary sort of call to action. They're selling a lifestyle, but we're really bad at that. We're really bad as a community of selling the lifestyle. The call to action that everyone hears is, well, learn to fly. Well, great, I have my certificate, but it takes time, money, and effort to maintain that certificate, maintain currency, maintain proficiency, so that not only can I fly, but I can enjoy flying. If I'm not flying enough, that means I get itchy. I get anxiety around stepping up to an airplane I haven't seen in a while, and that's not fun for anyone. And not only that, it's not safe. So we have to fly more, and the only way we're going to fly more is for people to have more access to more airplanes. That was the logic that started us down this path with building OpenAirplane, was how do we make everyone's pilot certificate more valuable? How do we fix the value proposition? And so we started with rental. We started with the idea that people today are more interested in access to the good than they are in ownership of the good. And that the math involved in choosing to buy an airplane and maintain it yourself is getting harder and harder for a lot of people. So we figured that the way we could impact the most people the fastest was to solve this problem that when you leave your home base, your pilot certificate becomes essentially useless until you turn it on again by going through this ridiculous process of a local checkout. Like, could we fix that was our first challenge.
I like that a lot. You use that word value proposition, and you mentioned earlier that the default call to action is learn to fly. Like it's like some, unobtainable sort of challenge or gift, which, you should strive for. But like you said, it takes energy, money, motivation to maintain a license. And I like the way that OpenAirplane is trying to fix that, as you said. It's good.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an interesting process. I've learned so much over the course of the last 2 years since we started flying. But again, this all started in 2001. The origin story that I tell people is that we started by talking to people about the idea, and really we started from a place where we used what we learned from military and commercial flying, this idea of standardization and evaluation, right? That allows military pilots to fly with much better safety records and commercial pilots to fly with much better safety records. And said, well, that works really well in those domains. What if we offered that same capability to your typical private pilot flying on their own pleasure and their own business? And if we could offer a stand eval program that everyone could easily access, this would lower the accident rate, increase the amount of flying that gets done, and the community overall could be healthier.
That's great. How did you start the sort of dialogue with, obviously there's two sides of the coin here, isn't there? There's the aircraft owners and there's the pilots. So what kind of conversations were you having in the beginning to sort of validate your idea?
The pilots were all for it. You talk to a pilot and say, look, if you do one check ride, you could fly all kinds of different places. They love that idea. We did a survey in 2001. 96% of the pilots we surveyed said they would fly more if this service existed. We asked them why weren't they flying more and more often and away from their home base. And 28% of the time it was just because it was hard to find airplanes. Yeah. Like, it was 45 minutes of Googling and phone calls, and try getting someone on the phone, at a flight school. It's a neat trick. They're busy running their businesses, and it's hard to keep up with the phones. So let's solve that. Let's make it easy for people to find where the airplanes that are available to fly are. And so we sort of started scheming on how to sort of solve that. Then 51% of the pilots told us that the reason they don't fly away from home is the complicated and expensive hassle of a local checkout. So how could we sort of solve that next, right? So if those two problems, finding the airplanes and getting access to the airplanes, if we could solve that, we could really put a dent in the downward trends in the industry. And so the conversation started with pilots, but very quickly the pilots all had the same feedback.
Yeah.
Well, this is a great idea, guys, but the insurance carriers will never let you get away with it.
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer for pilots, but insurance and ownership, yeah, what was the next step?
If there's any innovation in particular with OpenAirplane, it's, a lot of our doctrine, our technology, it's all borrowed from other places. And a lot of these things have been thought of before. We kind of put them together in a unique way to be able to solve the problem. But if there's one piece of innovation that came around this, is instead of trying to circumvent the industry, we decided to engage with it. So we went directly to the people that everyone told us would say we were crazy. We went to the insurance carriers. We went to the underwriters who decide what gets to happen, in terms of a pilot's renter's policy or a flight school's insurance. And we came to them with a very specific plan. We said, look, the doctrine we're proposing could lower the accident rate by 60%.
Excellent.
We could reduce the risk in flying significantly if more pilots did an annual standardization and evaluation event like they do, say, as a Civil Air Patrol pilot. We borrowed the Form 5 check ride from CAP. Civil Air Patrol pilots fly some of the most sort of challenging profiles. You're flying low and slow and maneuvering and, on schedule and on deadline, in stressful environments. Yet the accident rate for a CAP pilot was at the time trending at like 2.8 accidents per 100,000 hours flown. You compare that to piston engine singles in the United States, and which was over 6 accidents per 100,000 hours flown. So a 60% difference in terms of safety could be achieved by asking people to step up and demonstrate proficiency every 12 months. And that is really what we came to the insurance carriers with. We said, we have an opportunity for you to lower the accident rate, reduce your risk. And then only about 15% of pilots in the U.S. carry renter's insurance. Now, flying without renter's insurance to me is crazy. Like, how can you sleep at night? It's so inexpensive, $150 US for an annual policy. The cost of pretty much 1 hour of flight time gives you access to, a lot of protection. And so, we sort of baked that in. We required, as we designed OpenAirplane, that every pilot renting through our system would have renter's insurance, and have completed a universal pilot checkout every 12 months. And so as we designed this in partnership with the insurance industry, they slowly came around. Now, trust me, the first couple of underwriters I spoke to at Oshkosh in 2012, I think it was, or 2011, definitely weren't necessarily ready to jump in right away. I mean, I got the typical answer, that's a great idea. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah. The guys in grey suits sitting around a table, their pens on the table. Right. It's not happening.
Right. It was guys in polo shirts at picnic tables at Oshkosh, over a lemonade.
Yeah. But
they were at least willing to listen. We had our breakthrough when our first underwriter, it was Jim Anderson at Star Aviation. He understood what we were trying to do. He's willing to see if we can make it work. And so he was the first to raise his hand and endorse OpenAirplane. And then very quickly, it took me crashing a party at the, in Las Vegas. There was a conference of all the insurance underwriters. Believe it or not, there's an Aviation Insurance Association. Who knew? And I crashed their party. I did not have a ticket. I did not have an invite. They were all wearing sport coats, and and I just showed up. And luckily, they were willing to hear me out. And one by one, all but one underwriter in the U.S. market today has actually endorsed OpenAirplane. So we can almost universally, probably 97, 98% of the market now has access to renting their airplane through their current insurance provider through OpenAirplane, whether that's a flight school or a flying club or an FBO that rents airplanes. And so the conversation to get us from zero to where we are now really started with the insurance industry and engaging them and showing them a specific plan that really was aligned with everyone's incentives.
That's awesome. So, okay, you've got the insurance companies buy-in and, obviously one by one, starting off with Star Aviation. Obviously, you then had to take it to the FBOs, the organizations with these aircraft. And I can assume that, these short skirt checkouts are a revenue boost for these local clubs. You obviously had to sell the idea, and how did you go with that?
Two big helps there initially. One was the pilot community. So by the time we got to a point where we finally had sort of alignment from the insurance carriers to be able to launch the service, we then unveiled what OpenAirplane was going to be to the community. It was kind of a secret project for a while, and then we announced what OpenAirplane was going to be at Sun and Fun in 2012 at the big fly-in Lakeland, Florida in the spring. And by the time we launched in June of 2013 with the actual service, we had grown to over 5,000 pilots having signed up to fly with us.
Excellent.
And so having a community of 5,000 pilots who wanted to not just fly locally, but wanted to be able to get more value out of their pilot certificate really was a strong signal that we could share with the operators. So the flight schools, the flying clubs, and the FBOs. And so we were able to go to them and say, look, your insurance carrier is okay with this. And we've got a lot of pilots who think that they want to come fly with you. Can we get you on board? In that time, in November of 2012, Cessna Aircraft Company actually made us an endorsed partner. They saw the value. They saw how we could add value to their Cessna Pilot Center network.
Yeah.
It was one of those things that had been thought of. They wanted to do for a long time, but we had gotten to a place where we all had smartphones in our pockets, and we had the technology and the industry, sort of all aligned to actually make it happen this time. And so Cessna started promoting this to their CPC network. And so when we launched, 5 of the 6 operators in our network were CPCs. And we continue to grow. And then just this last year, we picked up Cirrus Aircraft as another endorsed partner and been integrated into their training program. So it's definitely starting to gain momentum, and we're building this coalition and this ecosystem of partnerships that make all the one by one we're solving these problems and solving these frictions for folks. But obviously, our pitch is getting easier to talk about with operators.
Yeah.
We sometimes I call a flight school and they've never heard of OpenAirplane, and then I explain what we do, and I don't know, maybe 15% of the time today I get what I refer to as the "get off my lawn" response.
Yeah.
Right? Like, no way, that's crazy. I need to give someone a checkout before I'm going to rent my airplane. What we've demonstrated over the last year and a half is that they're not losing revenue because they're not doing a checkout. They're gaining revenue because now all their current customers have an annual reason to come back and buy an hour on the ground and an hour and a half to 2.5 hours in the air to complete a universal pilot checkout, right? Instead of just doing a flight review every 24 months, the universal pilot checkout is a much more compelling value proposition for a flight school owner. And by becoming part of our network, they then become able to provide universal pilot checkouts, which is an additional service they can sell. And so what we're seeing is not less money coming in because now you're not doing local checkouts for the 4% of the pilots who finally sort of throw up their hands and say, sure, let's go ahead and do the checkout. Instead of going and doing something else, going to see a movie or playing a round of golf, whatever it is that they would do otherwise other than fly because of this onerous local checkout requirement, what they're seeing is seeing more of their own customers have more satisfaction and bring them more revenue because now they're doing these universal pilot checkouts on an annual basis, not just flight reviews every 24 months. On top of that, they're seeing the incremental revenue from folks who otherwise would never fly with them come fly the airplane and put hours on the aircraft and pay them for that. And so the airplanes are getting better utilization. They're getting more revenue. It's all incremental revenue above and beyond what they would see if OpenAirplane didn't exist. And so that story is starting to get easier to tell as we're getting more and more pilots flying and more flight hours under our belts.
Absolutely fantastic. I'm really excited by it. I'm assuming as well, because you've got a bit of time under your belt now, and I'm assuming you've got some interesting stats that you can pull out of across the whole of the network, sort of metrics, etc. Yeah,
it's something we track and are always looking to improve on. One of the first things that people want to know is, well, how can I trust a checkout that someone else did, right? My flight school is the best flight school, and the other flight schools, well, they don't necessarily know what they're doing. And that's why I started my own flight school, because I wanted to do this right. Exactly. No one could trust each other. So what we did is we used that concept of standardization and evaluation. We worked with NAFI, we worked with SAFE, we worked with Cessna to develop a standard that everybody could trust. And it's basically the PTS. It's the same standard, but now it's pass-fail instead of just sort of, well, keep flying until you kind of meet the standard. And because of that, we now see about 80% of the pilots who show up to fly a universal pilot checkout complete on the first try. So we definitely, as someone signs up to fly with OpenAirplane, we say, look, spin up your skills, make sure that you can fly to the PTS without sweating too hard, and then come and complete a universal pilot checkout. If you don't complete on the first try because you got rusty somewhere, that's great. We can try again. There's no harm, no foul, there's no pink slip. You can go get retraining and come back and try again. So what we're doing is we're giving pilots the opportunity to identify where they may have gotten rusty in a particular area. Maybe it was weather knowledge in the oral or airspace knowledge in the oral. That's something that sometimes gets a little foggy after a while. Or maybe it's the high air work, steep turns or stalls or something like that. Or crosswind landing technique isn't necessarily to the PTS. And again, we're not requiring pilots to be perfect. We just have to have them be safe, and the PTS is a standard that everyone understands. And so now we're seeing the statistics, pretty steadily at 80% pass rate. So some pilots maybe even get a little anxiety going when you start thinking about, coming and doing a universal pilot checkout. Check rides aren't necessarily fun. Well, they're fun if you're prepared, and they're fun when you're confident enough to know that your skills have not eroded. And so those are the pilots that we're attracting to fly with us. And because of that, once they have that skill, it's like a magic power, right? So the UPC does three things for pilots. This is my pitch. There's one thing that we can talk about, pilots should understand about OpenAirplane when they get to the end of the podcast, is that the universal pilot checkout does three things. It resets the clock on their flight review. It earns them up to a 10% discount on renter's insurance and gives them access to the same make model aircraft for 12 months across the U.S. And this can be for a pilot in the United States. It also can be for a pilot from overseas who has converted to an FAA certificate. So pilots who are certificated under EASA can convert to an FAA certificate and then use the universal pilot checkout as a way to renew their U.S. flight review that's required. They in order to maintain privileges to just use that FAA certificate, they have to do a flight review. So they might as well do a flight review that also resets the clock on being able to fly at all kinds of airports around the U.S., not just the one place that they happen to fly for that bit of required training. And because this unlocks so much capability and access for pilots, in the first year, 43% of the pilots who have ever done a universal pilot checkout have flown at 2 or more other airports around the country, in addition to the one where they got their checkout. And that is really the statistic that we're tracking in terms of engagement, that pilots, once having invested, in completing a checkout with one of the operators in the OpenAirplane network, really are getting more value out of their pilot credentials.
That goes back to what you said earlier, that value proposition. And that's a great metric to follow. So in terms of feedback from the pilots, everything's been positive?
And not everything. Flying isn't all beer and Skittles. The feedback is overwhelmingly positive.
Okay, that's more like it. Yeah.
The feedback is so important. In fact, we built it into the system. So when a pilot flies with OpenAirplane, they rate and review the airplane they just flew. Right? We've all shown up to the airport, and some airplanes are in great conditions, and some airplanes aren't. And the problem has always been, I don't know what I'm going to get. So now we have this feedback mechanism where every pilot flying with OpenAirplane has the opportunity to give the airplane they just flew a star rating and review it, and that becomes available to everyone. As well as the operator gets a star rating and a review by every pilot that flies, but only after they flew. So for instance, like Yelp and other sort of reputation systems online, they tend to break down because there's no way to know if that customer actually did business at that vendor, right? Well, now the only way you can review an airplane is if you actually flew it, and that then gets shared to everyone else in the community. So that's super valuable. The flip side is the operators are rating and reviewing the pilots.
That was going to be my next question. Excellent.
Yeah, so it's bi-directional. So pilots, are now, they bring their A game, right? They want to be good customers. They want to get a good review, so they'll put the airplane away. They'll make sure they get back on time. Obviously if you bring the airplane back late, leave FOD in the cockpit and bald spotted tire, you're not going to get a very good rating, right? So now we have this reputation system that's built into OpenAirplane that really is a tide that raises all boats, and both sides of the equation, both the operators and the pilots, both have incentive now to really fly their best, as my friend Jason from the Finer Points likes to say.
Excellent. Well, I like the idea, the concept, especially as a non-US pilot, possibly visiting the United States. And I like the idea of, I won't always be going to one particular location. So it's definitely something I personally would check out as well. So I wish you all the best and continued success.
Thanks, Marvin. We look forward to you flying with us.
Okay, let's jump out of OpenAirplane. No pun intended, with a parachute, obviously. And what is your proudest moment in your flying career so far? You obviously talked a lot about the Civil Air Patrol. Tell us, what's your proudest moment so far?
Well, I'll go back to that. After the superstorm, Hurricane Sandy, hit the U.S. coast, there was a disaster area that went from Cape May to Cape Cod on the U.S. eastern seaboard. And FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers needed to get, real-time photos of where the damage was, where was the help needed. Civil Air Patrol stood up an operation that in 8 days essentially created this real-time version of Google Maps. And some stuff that you couldn't do with satellite because, you have to get under the clouds to be able to visually look at some of these things. And up and down the coast, inland a few miles, this massive area got reconned by CAP, and I got to be part of that mission. It really was the reason I rejoined CAP as an officer in 2001 after 9/11. There, less than a decade later, I was over the New York Harbor flying, in a Cessna 182 in the Bravo, imaging the Statue of Liberty and Manhattan after this massive hurricane had damaged so much. And that was the moment where, okay, this is why I joined the team. That was my Super Bowl.
Love it. And you smashed it and won.
I've never flown in a war, but for that week, it sure felt like it was at least the level of pressure that your typical Sunday afternoon $100 hamburger doesn't usually come up to. But that's what that to me was also a large part of the experience. It wasn't just the actual flying part, which was great because I'd been well trained and well practiced over the years to go fly that mission. But it was the environment in which you were flying that mission with time pressures and limitations in terms of daylight and fuel and resources that really made it some of the most interesting flying I've ever done.
Fantastic. It definitely sounds like a very special moment. Well done. Okay, so taking breath from there, what are your future plans and aspirations? What's the future for Rod?
That's a great question. I mean, right now I'm focused on growing OpenAirplane. We're growing at a good clip. Last month's numbers were 253% over the year before, in terms of year-over-year growth, in terms of flight hours and revenue for the company. So we need to keep pushing and growing. The numbers are still small, but they're definitely heading in the right direction. We're getting more and more reports as pilots, do things they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. And so continuing to add capability and make it easier and reduce friction for our customers and our partners is definitely sort of my focus today, which means I get to occasionally fly airplanes, not as much as I'd like to. I still fly actively with CAP, so that's a lot of nights and weekends flying sometimes. And then I, at some point, would like to complete a tailwheel endorsement. I'd really like to get my CFI ticket done. That's kind of the natural progression. Though I'm doing some ferry flying, some professional ferry flying, which is a lot of fun. last trip I took was picking up for a Cessna 172 for a client in Raleigh, North Carolina, on the east coast of the U.S., and flying all the way across to San Diego on the west
Wow,
coast.
sounds awesome.
And it is an awesome flight. It's a great way to see the country as you claw along in the headwind. The winds are typically blowing out of the west toward the east, so you've always got a headwind on that trip. And so you're flying low across the desert and watching, trucks go by you as your ground speed is actually lower than that of the traffic on the highway below. But it's an amazing view, and it's kind of a fun sort of professional flying job. I look forward to continuing to do that. And like I said, there's always some things like getting a multi-engine rating, getting a flight instructor rating that comes next. I'm doing cadet orientation flights for Civil Air Patrol, so this kind of closing the circle. I fly, kids from around Chicago that have never flown an airplane before, and I get to take them up. So not only are they learning sort of the basics and the bookwork of aerospace education in their CAP cadet program, but the Air Force actually picks up the bill for them to actually fly 5 flights in powered and 5 flights in glider. So as an orientation pilot, I get to do some teaching, and that's a lot of fun. And so, like I said, I'll probably, start doing that as a CFI someday.
Excellent. Definitely giving back to the CAP there. That's really awesome. Okay, Rod, this is my favorite part of the show. This is the quick fire checklist. This is where I ask you a series of questions and you come back to us, the inspired pilots, with amazing and inspiring answers. How does that sound? You ready?
Let's do this.
What is the best piece of advice related to flying that you've ever received?
Absolutely. The basics are, and this works not only in flying, but in business and other places too, is remember cockpit discipline. You aviate, you navigate, and then you communicate in that order. So don't drop the airplane to fly the microphone. Always fly the airplane as your first priority. And I even use that in business, in that the business of OpenAirplane is helping pilots fly more. And the minute we get distracted from anything like that to do other things, it's not good for the business. And so aviate, navigate, communicate is discipline in the cockpit and discipline in life.
I love that. Flying analogies moving over into the business environment. That's awesome. Do you have a favorite internet flying resource that you'd like to share with the listeners?
So I've moved most of my flight planning off of the web browser and onto my iPad with ForeFlight. So, and you can use that without an internet connection. YouTube has become this place where you can not only experience a lot of flying, as more pilots are flying with cameras in the cockpit, or bolted to the airplane and sharing their experience that way. But it's also a great learning tool. We at OpenAirplane just did a sponsorship with Flight Chops out of California. He's a private pilot, has this fantastic YouTube channel. And so one of our challenges is that flying is a magic power, but it's hard to share. And YouTube makes it so much easier to, for folks to share the lifestyle of flying with people who might otherwise never get exposed to it. So I'm a fan.
Okay, ForeFlight, iPad, and YouTube. I'm a big fan of YouTube as well. Can you share one of your personal habits that you find useful and believe contributes to your flying success?
Well, I'm with Maria on this one, so your regular listeners will remember this. But it's important enough to reemphasize. So the Air Force has this idea of a last chance. So if you see like a fighter taxi up to the hammerhead at the end of a runway, there'll be a bunch of guys that are kind of hanging out there, and they'll swarm the airplane, and they'll do what's called the last chance. They'll make sure that no flags or pins are hanging, or that all the panels are closed, and that the airplane is ready to fly one last time. Which is great if you're flying an F-16 and you got a bunch of guys that are paid to do that. I am not. So when I get to flying, I have to do it all myself. But I still use the same doctrine. right? Because it works really well for the Air Force and it works really well for me. Jason Miller, who helped me get through my commercial training, he does the Finer Points podcast, was my instructor, and he really sort of pounded this one into me, and I thank him for that, because it's a great way to avoid embarrassing or expensive mistakes. So even though I've done a pre-flight and I've made my nest and everything's ready to go and I'm ready to hop in and close the door and fire it up, right at that point, I stop and I take that extra 30 seconds to a minute to take one last quick walk around the airplane. And and I take it with the idea that it was like being part of the last chance crew launching an Air Force airplane. This could be just me flying a Cirrus privately, or on a ferry trip, or flying for CAP. But the last chance is a great habit to pick up. At minimum, it'll mean you don't try to taxi away with the chocks in place.
Excellent. I love that. Last chance. Excellent. Okay, I think I know the answer to this one. Trikes or tail draggers?
I'm not a tail dragger pilot yet. I've flown enough to know that tail draggers are a great challenge that I look forward to, but I'm not there yet. There are people who think that anyone flying with a nose wheel is cheating. I get that.
I think I've heard that as well.
And I'm not a snob. So if the only answer I can really honestly give you is both.
Cheater. Okay. Can you recommend one aviation related book?
So first of all, it really is about always learning, right? So that's something that we're really going to look to do, is always be learning. One book, really?
You come up with a lot of concepts here. So if you could say there's one book that really inspired you, then that would be awesome. I'll be going out and buying it tomorrow.
Have you read The Right Stuff?
I haven't, no. Is that it?
So it's a great movie. I mean, it's a really great movie, but the book has so much more. So I think almost everyone flying has probably seen the movie, but the book by Tom Wolfe that was the foundation for the movie is a really great read.
Okay, and what did you take out of that flying wise?
We have it so easy. we have our iPads on our knees and our G1000 glass cockpits and so much the technology and the systems and the training have wrung out so much of the risk out of flying airplanes, whether that's a single engine piston or a jet. That back in the day, the risks were just the unknowns. There were so many unknowns. Whether it was at the end of the development of supersonic flight or going into space, which now we're getting into a whole new sort of golden age of real sort of innovation. I am my call sign is fanboy, and I'll call it that. If I'm fanboy about anything, it's about Elon Musk and SpaceX and what they're doing today. But back then, man, it was they strapped on airplanes and did things that as part of just their daily jobs that I can't even fathom. I mean, I'm old enough to remember flying without a GPS, but barely.
Likewise. Excellent. Okay, I'll make sure The Right Stuff and by Tom Wolfe is in your show notes. Okay, I think you mentioned this earlier. What is your favorite non-essential but essential to you technology gadget in your cockpit?
Gosh. So I fly search and rescue with the Civil Air Patrol. And, that is obviously a volunteer gig that has some important sort of connotations to it. I don't want to be the guy who survives the crash and then, having flown the airplane down to the very bitter end and gotten out and then, dies of exposure. Like that seems ironic.
You don't get any points for that, do you?
Yeah, it's not cool, you know. I'm actually someone who tries to, whether I'm flying locally or flying cross country, as I do, like if I'm doing a cross country ferry, at least try to be prepared for what happens if I have to land off airport. So it could be simple as making sure that my cell phone is always charged when I'm flying locally, so that if I do have to, you know, put it down somewhere, you know, not in earshot of, you know, a farmer's house or something like that, I can at least call for some help. And then if I'm flying longer trips, you know, I've got a signal mirror, I've got a spot tracker or some way, you know, some kind of signal plan that would allow me to be able to attract a ride home without too much drama. You know, I try to have a, you know, a survival kit of some bit. So I've always got bits and pieces in my flight bag that are tuned to the mission, and that will hopefully at least help me get a ride home if I don't end up at the destination I was hoping for.
Okay, excellent. I'll take that. That sounds good. Good advice as well. Okay, it's my favorite question now. If you had a time machine and could go back in time and meet your younger self just before you're about to start your flying journey, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself, Rod?
I don't have a lot of regrets. I didn't go down the path of being a professional pilot for a day job. The startup is really my first sort of full-time aviation gig. I would just say to myself, you know, the classic sort of fighter pilot mantra: ears open, mouth shut. Learn as much as you can, as fast as you can. The fighter pilots have a saying that says, never miss an opportunity and keep your mouth shut. I don't think I learned that lesson super early in my development as a human being. So I think I could have probably learned from that.
Ears open, mouth shut. Oh, I like that. Okay, Inspired Pilots, you can find all the links to all the resources and everything else we've been talking about in today's episode by going to inspiredpilot.com and search for Rod in the search bar to find the show notes for this episode. Okay, Rod, listening to your journey and the stories you've shared, I do love the Civil Air Patrol stuff. It's quite inspiring, and obviously, you know, flying for a great cause, and I assume you do get some free flying in there as well. Can you give the audience of Inspired Pilots one last piece of guidance and then share how people can get in contact with you, and then we'll sign off?
Sure. I think if there's one thing I want to point out is that the lifestyle of being a pilot is something that we should be sharing with folks, and we should get out there and enjoy. So my biggest challenge right now is, you know, working with the rest of the community to figure out how do we get everybody off the couch and into the cockpit, right? I think that if you have this magic power, we should be going out and using it as much as possible and sharing it with as many people as we can. Take that coworker flying for their first hop. Don't just chat about it over coffee. Go do it and really just fly. The minute we stop learning, the tougher it is to get back to it, and then again that investment starts to erode. So like I said, I always tell people, just shut up and fly.
Excellent. Shut up and fly.
Now, okay, so I'm pretty easy to find. Obviously, everyone who wants to, you know, fly with OpenAirplane, whether they're a U.S. pilot or whether they're overseas and want to start flying with us when they come to visit, can come to OpenAirplane.com. We're on Twitter at OpenAirplane, just one word, and Facebook and Instagram and all that. I'm pretty much on all those various surfaces at Rod Rakic. And then, of course, they can always drop me a line at rod@openairplane.com on email.
Awesome. Rod, thank you for joining us on the show today, for your time. You've been very generous. On behalf of the Inspired Pilots, I'd like to say thank you very much and speak to you again.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for joining me today on episode 16 of the Inspired Pilot podcast. Rod was a great guest, and he definitely had a lot to say, especially about his role and experiences with the Civil Air Patrol, which on face value does seem like a great organisation to be a part of if you're a civilian US-based pilot and want to add real value to your flying. I do like Rod's current venture, OpenAirplane, which, as he stated, is gaining momentum across the United States. They've been operating for a number of years now. They've overcome some pretty significant obstacles, and it's great to see some real innovation actually occur within the US GA rental market, all designed to make renting aircraft and therefore flying easier. personally, it'd be very interesting to see whether such a system could actually work in Europe, Australasia, Canada, or other areas of the world with relatively large private general aviation numbers. What do you think? Don't forget to head over to the show's website, inspiredpilot.com. That's where you'll find the show notes for every episode. You can also leave a comment for Rod just below the show notes and for the other guests on their pages. You'll also find the links to all the resources mentioned and much, much more. I really appreciate and love receiving feedback about the show, so do get in touch. I reply to every single email and am active on Facebook and Twitter. If you do like the show, I would be really grateful if you share it with your friends, colleagues, and fellow AvGeeks. And if you do feel inclined, please leave a rating and review on iTunes with as many stars as possible, as this does help increase the show's exposure and therefore get the journeys of our featured inspiring pilots in front of and inspiring more people, which is the whole mission of this podcast. And don't forget, wherever you are in your pilot journey, get ready to be inspired.